All right, everybody, welcome to How to Recession-Proof Your Job Search in 2024. Thank you for joining us on a Monday, January 29th. We are almost done with the first month of the year. And the question I like to ask everyone around this time is, how are your New Year's resolutions going? If they're not going so well, maybe we can give you a jump start for February and work through that. You might also be asking, what recession? And you'd be technically correct because we're not actually in a recession, but it feels like a personal recession for a lot of folks. And we're here to help answer some questions, create some clarity, and really just see what we can do to help figure out what's next for everybody. So I guess, yeah, let's get started.
Yeah, welcome. Excited to have folks. We've run this sort of topic of a couple times in the last year or so, and we've updated it a bit. So I'm actually quite excited to hear a little bit more as we get into it on kind of the market. Albert's sort of the expert on all things market and positioning, so that'll be really fun. Um, so kind of order of business to get us rolling. Most of you are probably familiar with Albert's List, but just on the offhand chance, if you're not, and you kind of came across this webinar from some other source, Albert's List, the community has been around since 2013. Albert is the founder, and Elisa and I have sort of been part of the crew since, gosh, I think 2014, 2015, 20, something around there. We've been sort of around and hanging out and being part of the group and moderating it. But if you're not part of the job search community, there's a huge Facebook group. There's lots of good stuff. We do virtual events, including mock interviews, hiring fairs, all kinds of goodies, and a range of sort of paid and free events. So there's lots of good stuff there, and we encourage you, if you're not already, just to join the community, become part of it. A little bit about myself: I'm in the middle there. As mentioned, I've been around in the Albert's List community for quite some time. I also help to lead our 8 Weeks to Employ bootcamp, which we run 2 or 3 times a year, and I run my own coaching and training practice, which is the early manager. And Elisa, do you want to say hey to the folks and just introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I, like Joe, just a long term volunteer for Albert's List. And for anyone that wants to know how Albert and I met, happy to share that story many, many moons ago. So just currently help support the community with programming, webinars, and then mainly facilitating the boot camp. So happy to share more about that as well. But this is an amazing community, and just want to thank everyone for hopping on tonight to hear a little bit more about what's happening in the job market as well as career space.
Awesome. Love that. Yes. And Albert, did you want to say a word or two about we know you're the founder. It's kind of hard to hide.
Yeah, we got a lot of people here from a lot of different places. So if you're not from this Albert's List that you just mentioned, fear not. It is we're a friendly group of people. We're a job search community that I founded back in March of 2013. So we're about to celebrate 11 years. And our community is 50,000 plus strong. And really, the intention is to help you find your next job or at least get clarity around it because there's so much going on these days and it can be such a cluster, just to be friendly for the families out there that might be listening.
Yeah. Yeah, not the truth.
So, yeah.
I love it. Straight talk. So what we're going to sort of dig into for this particular webinar is we're going to talk a little about kind of the market. Albert will share some insights and kind of thoughts about the data that we're able to see and kind of what it looks like. Nobody here is expecting a crystal ball. It's kind of a complicated job market. So I'm interested myself to hear what Albert has to kind of share. Albert will also talk a little about kind of how to think about and sort of systematize your job search. And that's something that we do a lot of as moderators for the Albert's List community, as leaders for the 8 Weeks to Employ bootcamp. And then I'll actually be digging in a little bit to kind of specific strategies. So we'll be talking about kind of how, what tactics actually work and looking at some examples. So we'll talk about these topics, kind of, again, a little bit about systematizing your search, some different strategies that we sort of work with folks in the boot camp and teach folks to utilize. And there's some sort of oldies but goodies like networking and things like that we'll talk a little bit about as well. So we'll kind of get into the nuts and bolts of that. And the way we're really quite flexible in how we do webinars. So feel free to put questions into the chat, or there's most of you are familiar. There's a little Q&A poll feature at the bottom of your Zoom. when you're logged in. So feel free to, throw questions, thoughts, feedback in either of those places. And, Lisa and I will just try to keep an eye on the chat and make sure that we, get into and answer any questions that folks have. So, yeah, excited to have folks here. That's what it's going to look like for the next, 30, 40 minutes. And Albert, we can kind of get into if you want to talk a little bit about the market and kind of where things are at.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's go to the next slide. So, what I like to think about when I go through this, and I've given several of these presentations to start the year, is that in order to understand where we're going collectively in this whole entire economy, we have to understand where we've been and where we are kind of are at this current point in time. And it's a really complex collection of different things that really is complex. And so let's go to the next slide and look at what some of these narratives might be. And you might know some of these narratives too. So feel free to chime in. So the first one obviously is layoffs, layoffs, layoffs. We've had about 420,000 of these since the beginning of January 2022. And it feels like we get these every single day. And really, it hasn't really subsided all that much. But what we really need to know is that layoffs have been the core and the center of a lot of things that have been going on for the last year, right? Last January, it really kind of came to a head as Facebook and Google, and a lot of these large FANG companies and Amazon just ended up cutting droves and droves of people. They blamed the pandemic and pandemic habits ending, right? You, me, and everyone else decided that we didn't want to stay inside for the rest of our lives. And we started going outside again. And that was apparently not good enough for these companies, even though they were still making money. And these layoffs still continue. Google let go of a bunch more people this last month. Gaming companies are going through a moment, and it's just kind of nuts in its own way. Let's go to the next slide. And so, even though all of this continues to happen, whether you believe or the Bureau of Labor Statistics or not, unemployment officially remains low. So, we're seeing unemployment in the mid to high threes right now. It's hanging out at 3.7%. And it's been some of the lowest that it's been in the last 50 to 60 years or so. And so, while unemployment does remain low, it seems like people are still continuing to find those jobs. Yet, on the other hand, it's not always, I think, cracked up to be because you do have a lot of folks who were laid off and also have gone months and months without finding new employment. And if you're one of those people, let us know in the webinar chat. We really want to know where you're standing at right now because we really want to help. Next slide. And so this also leads us into other work trends that are dominating the 2024 conversation. I think, right, there are 9 of them here, but the ones that a lot of folks think about is what is it exactly that companies care about these days? And right, if you guessed AI, you're definitely in the ballpark of what it is that companies are doing. We're seeing layoffs because companies are laying off folks and trying to pivot and transition their investments. We're seeing that skills matter a lot these days, and a lot of those are still generative AI skills that people go through. We also have salaries starting to crash. The cost of labor is going way through the roof. And, as workers, we care about that a lot, but we also have companies that think they apparently can't afford people, even though they very well can. Um, and so next slide. And so the other thing to think about, and Joe and I talk about this a ton, both on LinkedIn and our Facebook group, is now that the economy is starting to transition, what actually matters? And so one thing that I'd like to look at, because it really tells us the pulse of what is going on in the economy, is what companies are getting funded, right? So startups that are getting funded and what's going on in that realm. And if you look at that here, it's a lot of AI, it's a lot of sustainability. You have a couple of companies here that work in some of these other industries like internet and mobile and telecom and e-commerce. But for the most part, it's AI all day, followed by sustainability and the future of our climate, And, Jewel Labs up there at 1.3 billion is just so that they could get funding to survive because they've been hit by a lot of fines. So I'd actually take that one off for a moment. But looking at the rest of the market, if you're looking for a job in these kinds of industries, it's generally the place to go because your opportunity for getting hired is actually a lot better. Um, and yeah, I guess some are asking they're in sustainability. Why can't they find work? And so, that's it kind of feels like a cruel joke sometimes there too, because it's like, well, are the jobs real? Are they using AI for everything? What's going on? And so today in this presentation, we're going to go over that a little bit too, because Joe and Elisa are the master of being able to get through to people on LinkedIn and actually get folks to respond to you. And we know people who do that as well, but more a little bit on that later. And so to just say the least, right, 2024 is going to be an interesting year. We're not quite in that recession, but we have a lot of layoffs that bring significant concern across tech, finance, and who knows that will crumble into other places because people are going to be long-term unemployed for a while. The emergence of AI is going to be interesting because a lot of companies are going to want to just let go of people because AI does exactly what they thought they're going to do. And maybe replace people because some people are literally just that greedy, right? I'm going to tell it like it is, right? Companies are in business to stay in business and make a profit. And if they're not making a decent enough profit for some people, apparently, then it's time to let go half the farm. And then, it's also understanding the ongoing trends this year to navigate your job hunt that are going to be important as well. So one of the things just to note is just knowing that AI and climate change, and in between that, you have global geopolitical uncertainty and a presidential election. All of those things are going to be very distracting this year. And I encourage all of you to, know that those things are important, but also know that you are in control of your own destiny. So, with that said, I think the next thing to think about is when you look at this job search, what kind of framework do you want to have? And so, Joe, go to the next slide. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how to think about your job search. And the first thing that I like to go through is this handy dandy chart that you've noticed before, probably at some point in your life, especially for those of you who majored in marketing in college. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so Maslow's hierarchy of needs describes the basic things that you need in this world in order to feel like the human being that you want to feel. You have your physiological interest, getting your food, your water, your sleep. Then you have a feeling of feeling safety, right? Employment is on that second level because, unless you don't have a house, I guess for some folks, it just doesn't work. And then from there, you feel like you can have friendship, family, intimacy, all the way up to feeling philosophical in your life. And so I think about that. And when I think about that, next slide, I think about how you can apply that to the job search with the job search fundamentals, or what I like to describe the hiring hierarchy, because a lot of us go through a job search without knowing what it is, the skills, the things that we need to showcase when we show up to an interview, and so forth, in order to be at our most effective. And so when we come to talking about the job search, filling these gaps is something that we do at Albert's List. And we believe that by filling these gaps, you increase your odds and you make yourself a far more attractive candidate. And so what does that look like? Go to the next slide, Joe. And so this is what I call the hiring hierarchy. It's a chart that I created about 6 years ago. I'd been thinking about it on my long drives between the Bay Area and LA when I lived there at the time. And what it was meant to do was to really showcase your ability to build a level of job search skill that would make you effective in the market. And so when you look at the bottom of this pyramid, which is your fundamentals, kind of like what you saw in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the importance of being able to find a job starts with everything from your hunger, your attitude, your hustle, your resilience. I even put attitude twice here unintentionally because I thought it was so important. Your commitment to be able to find a job, right? And so what does that look like, right? That's you waking up in the morning and saying, I'm going to commit 4 hours every day to the job search until I find my next job. It's not saying that I'm going to spend 5 hours today 12 hours tomorrow, 1 hour the day after that, and then I'm going to go take 3 days off because job hunting requires a certain level of consistency. And so once you get yourself that, what does that really feed into next? It feeds into your resume writing, your personal branding, the networking you do, your job searching skills of where you go for your websites to go find jobs and so forth. And you you get the right skills and you learn how to interview. And once you do that, you can think of the job that you want to get as a vision for yourself. You're able to communicate the metrics that you're able to achieve. You have the right strategies in mind to help your next company, and that feeds up into leadership. And so, next slide, or at least this piece. Yeah. So just breaking it down, right? You might get overwhelmed by this. It's easily overwhelming because there's so much to consider. But the first two levels is absolutely essential. You can't find any job without mastering most of those skills, your ability to network, your ability to show up, your ability to be self-aware, know your strengths, know your weaknesses, and work through that. And then and then the skills up at the upper part of the pyramid isn't necessary to get a job per se, but having them will make you stand out even more. And so today we're going to talk about a combination of both. And so you won't hear it from me as much. You'll hear a little bit more from Elisa and Joe as you go through the next few slides. And they're going to talk to you about some of the things that you can use, free tips, tricks, and skills today that you can take away, even if you never want to see anything that we say again in the next couple of slides. So let's go to the next couple of slides here.
Perfect. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that positioning is really sort of vital, Albert. You're someone who always thinks about things at this really cool kind of high level. You're thinking about how a lot of things connect. And, I think especially your point about kind of what does that foundation look like is a really important one. And I just want to encourage people to take some time to think about that. We'll send out the presentation, the deck afterwards, we'll share the recording, et cetera. But I think it's really important to think about the bottom of that pyramid in terms of like, how do I set up a system for myself that allows me to be consistent? What kinds of things do I need to do? What kinds of supports and resources do I need to have on hand? And the reason I say that is because that really does feed into this more tactical stuff, right? And folks who've been on a webinar with me before or been through the boot camp know I love tactics, right? I come from a marketing background. I'm like, how do we figure out the tactics to get you where you're going and reverse engineer your job search? But it's very hard to do those tactics if you don't have a set of habits and just kind of a foundation that works for you. And everybody's a little bit different, honestly, in that. So let's talk about kind of first strategy, which is really just, not rocket science. It's about kind of making your job search repeatable and scalable and just something that actually works for you. So, one of the things that I always talk with folks about is I often start with kind of talking through like staging your job search. And the more clarity that you have on the stages of your job search, the easier it is to A, sort of identify where you are at in a given moment, and then B, sort of figure out what you need to do next. And that can kind of help you just stay sort of focused and taking care of business, right? So what does that actually look like? Here is, kind of an example. This is actually our, oops, let me close that. This is kind of our HQ that we use for folks in the boot camp when we're sort of walking people through how to use the materials, which, by the way, all of our materials from the 8 weeks to employee boot camp, which we'll mention a little bit later, are all open sourced. So you can literally use these pretty much anytime you want. We encourage folks to get some value out of it. But the staging of the search is really set up so that you can kind of understand where you're at and what activities you are taking within that stage. And at the end of the stage, there should be a conversion point. So stage one is finding job opportunities. And at the very bottom of stage one, you're adding jobs to your tracker. And I know most folks have probably played with some type of job tracker at some point or another. There's different tools and login platforms you can do for that. Some people are sort of master of the spreadsheets. Other folks use different kinds of lists tools and Asana and Trello and other kinds of things like that. Really not, I think it's not required that you use a specific one. You try to find one that works for you, but we do have a couple of trackers that we use. So let me actually, while I'm at it, let me just share really quick. If you haven't seen this doc or this is new, this is a really nice kind of example of the staging. Let's see, let me grab that link. and I'll drop it in. And by the way, you're welcome to make a copy of this. We pretty much encourage folks to, make their own copy of these types of materials. There we go. That's in the chat. I'll drop it again in a little bit too. You can go up to File and then make a copy here to set up another Google Doc. You can download it as a Word doc or some other format if you like to. But the reason that we mention kind of the staging piece is essentially, the first piece is sort of figure out where you're at staging wise. And by the way, sometimes you go between them. Like I'm pretty straightforward about that when I talk with folks is, sometimes you're like, okay, I'm trying to find jobs, but I'm also interviewing and I'm also kind of waiting for an offer. So you could kind of be in multiple stages at once, but structuring your job search in this way helps you move between both, 2 stages, or even if you're in 3 stages kind of at the same time. It just helps you focus so that, for example, if you get a bunch of interviews and you go through them and nothing pans out, well, then you're probably kind of back in stage 1. So now, okay, let me go back to those stage 1 activities and do those tactics and things like that. So there's a lot here. I'm not going to, go into really intense detail about it, but I did just kind of want to mention it because I think pretty much everything from a tactical perspective goes back to, how do you structure your job search in stages? And you may make a copy of this doc and, kind of change it. And, you may add, like, for example, you may add a screening list or delete things that don't work for you, or, you have other resources on hand that you can kind of combine with this. Everybody is going to do it a little bit different, but this is some really good stuff that we've really seen work for folks over the last 3+ years. And so it's kind of like a community source to document and list in that sense. One other thing I'll just mention really quickly is that there is a job tracker template here. This is an Airtable, so it's kind of near the top of the doc. I couldn't be a bigger fan of Selena Mendoza, great product management, professional and product leader. So, tip of the hat to Selena for creating this, longtime member of the Albert's List community. That's a pretty good tracker. You may not use that, you may use others, but that one is a really good example of how to kind of use a tracker in your search. So that's just kind of a little bit of an example of, really staging your search in a way that is functional and helpful. And again, I mentioned the job tracker. That's kind of the same link here. That's the one that Selena created. You may also want to think about how you can kind of project manage your time. I mentioned a little bit about kind of using, maybe using like Asana or Trello or Monday.com. Everybody's a little bit different. I think as an example, people who are kind of calendar oriented, this is a job search calendar that's just kind of like a mock or an example calendar. Oops, let's see if it loads here. It might take a second. Sometimes it's a little slow. Oh yeah, perfect. So this particular calendar just has some kind of pre-filled example sort of appointments or tasks or things like that. So just, as a very, I should turn off my calendar here. Ignore the other stuff. This is a really busy calendar. You shouldn't be doing this much stuff, hopefully. I hope. So this is just the job search calendar. There we go. So what you might do is you might, if you're thinking about stage 1, finding opportunities, you might, sort of add particular stuff here, from that stage, that are like tactical things that you're doing. You might also be, one of the other tactics that's mentioned is you might be scanning particular groups or forums or Slacks or, whatever the case might be. Just making sure that you block your time so it's easy to just go in there to your calendar, click through, update that stuff, go to your watch list or your tracker and add it. If it's an opportunity, bam, you're good on stage 1, right? So this is just kind of an example. Everybody's a little bit different. Again, in that HQ kind of staging doc, there's a little bit more context near the top for how you can kind of structure time and tasks and project manage, and encourage folks to take a peek at that. There's some good stuff in there. But the big takeaway being just, make sure that you are sort of structuring your time in a way that works for you. Because again, everybody's different. Some people love calendar, blocking out time in calendar. Other people, not so much, right? That doesn't work for them. They're more flexible. We've also got a job search tool that Elisa and, my brain is sort of lost. Elisa, who did you?
Lucy. Lucy
yes.
and a bunch of other, collective group effort.
Yeah, yourself and Lucy sort of started it, and I think a bunch of people added kind of context to it. This is a cool little job search tool that's kind of built into a spreadsheet format. And if you're welcome to share anything about it that you want to, Elisa, I think it's just a really handy tool that folks can use.
Yeah, so I wanted to just take a quick second to look at some of the questions.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Through the Q&A and just like direct message. So a lot of people are saying that, obviously like the job search is a marathon. There could be wage stagnation, there could be multiple things, seasonality at play. So I think the job search tool, and everybody's asking for like, what's the right strategies? And there's so many different ways we can go about this. But I kind of like anchoring to the job search tool that Joe is screen sharing right now, as well as the Google Doc that he mentioned earlier on structuring your job search. There's just two different ways to go about it, but basically the goal is to keep you in the routine or rhythm of like job searching, but in a more efficient way versus like turning on Google and searching for your favorite company and seeing if there's active jobs. We have a boot camp coming up via Albert's List where we go more in depth as to like how to utilize the tool and how to really flex that muscle, make it your own, customize these open source docs. So, but for now, it's like these are free resources. We wanted to democratize access to it because we really feel like this, folks impacted by layoffs, folks returning into the workforce, they need something to go to daily just to like revitalize a job search. So we'll share the links again. Joe just went over both of them. They're pretty self-explanatory. You just click into it. And then based on where you're at in your job search, you can plug and play. And like I said, if you have any questions about it, just ping us on LinkedIn and we can go more into how to utilize it.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. Good context. And I would just say too, I think to your point, Elisa, like, everybody uses these kinds of tools a little bit differently. We just like to always mention them. The way that time works for an individual person or tasks work for an individual person is very different, right? We all have very different styles and habits. That's a good thing. And so these kinds of things are sort of built flexibly to allow folks to, to kind of move between it. So your tracker might look a little bit different from my tracker. Or at least this tracker or anyone else's if we're out there job searching. And so that's kind of a good thing. I think I sort of see that as an important thing, but it's easy to get lost in the search too. So that's kind of why we try to provide something that, really gets into some good structure. And one other thing on organizing a search is that, it is an iterative process. So, the first go at it is not going to be perfect. You're going to have to keep coming back and looking at it. And in fact, I'm pretty sure somewhere in my, my sort of example job search calendar, there's a little, I can't remember where it is. I think it's like update job tracker. It might be, check my tracker and see if it still works kind of thing somewhere in here. But the idea is basically that, you may need to block out time to kind of look at your search and say, okay, it's Friday. Let me just kind of look at what I did this week and okay, what worked, what didn't work, what do I want to do differently next week. And, it doesn't have to be on a Friday. It could be on a Sunday or a Monday, whatever your sort of habits are, but just making time to kind of be iterative about your job search and changing the structure a little bit at a time to kind of work for you. Because if you find that something doesn't work, great, that's good information, right? It might not be your favorite thing to have, kind of felt a little mired in something, but, it's still good to know what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And that's, that's kind of half the battle in a lot of cases. And as quite a few folks can attest to, in the chat, it's taken a while to find a job. What we've certainly seen with our work, with Albert's List community is that, that time to find a role and land a role and interviewing and hiring is getting longer in some cases. So it's just, having a system that helps you kind of go through that and being patient about that is definitely part of the game. Another thing that's coming up a lot, and I think a couple of people mentioned it in chat too, sort of like, how do I use AI tools, right? Should I use
Sorry, real quick.
Yeah.
Before we go into AI, which because I know this is like of high interest, I just want to make sure we're addressing everything in chat, which it sounds like Kate H answered it, but Steve was asking Joe, can you mention again the PM tools? And it looks like it's Asana, Monday, and Jira. Is that right? Or I just want to check with you.
Oh, yeah. Asana, Monday.com, and Trello. Trello.
Trello.
Yeah. Those are, if you go back, 15 years, project management tools all looked very different. Now they're all a little more the same, and they tend to be, kind of, I wouldn't say replaceable, but, they can all be kind of structured in similar ways. But I think those three are all pretty functional and worth trying out. And, I use them for all sorts of things, not just job searching, but other kinds of, the stuff I need to get done for my house and things like that.
Yeah.
If you want to see an example of that, I could share that too.
Yeah, for folks that are interested, ping Joe. And then a couple of other things. I saw that just moved up a little bit,
Oh, yeah.
but Ankur shared, something that's come to realize is that, and he mentions autism and ADHD, but I think this could apply for anyone, folks that are neurodivergent or just, not everyone is cut from the same cloth. And so thanks, Christy. She provided a good resource. But I think, just because you realize this, and it can seem like a crutch for some, I think it's all about storytelling and sharing how these conditions actually strengthen your candidacy or add to it. And then tying it back to why you want to apply for the role, assuming that you're actively job searching, etc. So Joe and I can go more into this. It all has to do with positioning and sharing and tying it back to how you are a competitive candidate, assuming that this is for a job search. So I just wanted to mention that, just,
Yeah, for
job
sure.
search tools, but there's many ways to go about it.
Yeah, I'm glad, before I get into the AI thing, I think it's whenever we're thinking about accessibility and we're thinking about, different learning styles, and also thinking about what accommodations folks might need in the context of a job or workplace, there's a lot of variation. And, I'm always very upfront. I'm not an expert in this particular area. I'm definitely familiar and think about it and care a lot about it. I have ADHD, so my sort of work and learning style, I've definitely learned a lot about it. I've learned a lot about, oh, wow, there's certain workplaces and certain supervisors or, founders or managers that I can't really work for if they won't, work with me on the way that I think about and learn and approach things. So I'm aware of, a lot of the things that kind of go into what we now sort of know as or think about as neurodiversity. But it's very different in different cases. And I think, the degree to which you might, want to disclose that information, before, during, or even, as you start a job, it's very different for different folks. I don't have any specific specific sort of advice about that, other than that I think it is really important to connect with people who do work in that area specifically. And I'll try to do a link. This is a great reminder. I'm glad this came up. I'll try to do a LinkedIn post on quite a few folks that I know who work in those spaces. For example, I know a few coaches who do kind of career and sort of job search coaching, and they themselves are autistic, or they may have another, like ADHD or another neurodiversity element in their lives that they are happy to talk about. And so that it's always great to have folks who have sort of been there and you can relate to, based on where you're at. So that's sort of what I'll say about that. But I just kind of wanted to mention that, I think we're starting to see a more open conversation about those things and what the interplay is like with workplaces, but there's still plenty of discrimination, and, the degree to which you might choose to disclose at some point during the process is definitely a personal choice. So just kind of being really honest and straightforward about that, I think is kind of important. And some people are just like, screw it, I am who I am. I'm going to do what I need to do in the work. They're going to love me. They're not going to love me. It is what it is. And that works for some people, but for a lot of us, there's kind of like a blend or a mix of that that's needed. So, Lisa, was there one more question I think you were going to mention?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, there's so much to tackle on, like, ADU, like, I've been seeing in the chat, like, quirks, actions, like conditions you might have. There's kind of a thoughtful way to go about, sharing this with your manager so that you can build that benefit of the doubt and speak to your abilities in the job. And then also just for folks that feel like they need to disclose it, you never need to disclose any of that unless you are requesting for reasonable accommodations. One of the great things about Albert's List community is this question came up with another job searcher, and one of the attorney experts was able to weigh in as to like what that looks like. So it was kind of a good reminder, a jog for Joe and I on like, okay, how can we support our community and respond to this? So if you have questions about that, feel free to ping us and we're happy to connect you to the resource. And then just to round out questions, a couple folks DM'd, like having a recent master's or recent PhD, that's a lot of time spent in higher education. And so when you come out into the workforce, do you apply for internships? Do you apply for residencies? Like, what does that look like? And I say, like, you're no different than just someone that spent 10 years in the workforce, right? and I shared my experience within the Q&A. Like I included my own master's research and skill sets under the professional experience section, and was just able to speak to how those bullet points or accomplishments translated into what I feel like could be successes or value adds for the job that I was applying for. Never gotten any questions about it, just the cross utilization of that. And so you're looking for a job where they're asking for 5 years experience and you spent 2 or 5 years in the education sector, I think it still applies. So it's, again, it's all about positioning and how you storytell that in the live interview or screening. And our open source doc also goes more into that in a more eloquent way. So we'll be sharing those links. And then just a quick note, the docs that we're sharing is free and open source because, as Joe and I mentioned, we really feel like we just want to open up that access to anyone that is needing that support. But if you need more of a tailored approach, you're actively pursuing certain roles, you'd like to be part of an accountable community, we also have our job search bootcamp coming up. I think that's the two things that's been really helpful for folks that have gotten job offers coming out of it, is that they have a community to keep them accountable. And then you're also part of the LinkedIn groups post bootcamp, just to continue that experience. So I'll drop the link in there for folks that are looking for that, tailored approach, but there's, again, no right way to go about it.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad the accessibility and accommodations question came up. I made a note about that, and also the ageism kind of question that has come up. I think a couple of folks tapped on that in chat. So we'll come back to that as we sort of wrap up at the end too. And those are both really important and meaningful topics that we probably can do some future events on too. Okay, so let's wrap up the AI talk a little bit. So I think, long story short with AI, I guess the way I would most appropriately approach it is, yes, it's worth using these tools, but it's worth using them in a tailored and supportive way, not as a replacement. And I'll give you an example. Like I think someone mentioned ChatGPT earlier. If you put a prompt into ChatGPT right now that says, write me a cover letter for, top tier product manager. Well, I would imagine a number of other people are putting a pretty similar prompt in, and, the output's a little bit different every time with these generative tools, but not that different. So you might be sending a cover letter that's kind of the same as a few other people, right? So that's like an example of, okay, maybe this isn't the right way to do it. Versus maybe here's an example of maybe how to kind of like, use it for resume generation. Maybe you really take the time to, find some good kind of impact metrics, drove XYZ result or whatever, and you pick 3 or 4. Maybe you workshop those with some fellow product managers, a career coach. Maybe you workshop them in a couple of online communities you're in, and you kind of fine tune them. And then you might use an AI tool to kind of help edit it. So your prompt might be different. Instead of write me a resume or a cover letter, it might be something like, hey, can you, look at the following, impact points and, give me a couple of drafts that rewrites them to be a little more impactful using action language. Okay, that's a little bit more of a specific usage, right? And so this particular article, which is linked in the presentation, and I'll send it along, has some good examples of different kinds of tools that are very sort of niche in that sense. So there's some resume builders and things like that you can play with, but I like some of the examples, and there's some good visuals in here that talks about how to use specific tools to help you, do things like sort of find a match or a fit, between your, hey, these are some skills and tools or traits or experiences that I have. What would that match to? So some of these tools offer a more specific kind of tailored way to use it. And for example, I do like JobScan, although I don't really care about the scoring and the match rates. That, some of that stuff's a little like, I don't know if that's that accurate. But the matching of the specific terms and phrases and helping you kind of see, what you're missing, for example, would be a really good thing. And I think in general, that's kind of the state of, AI tools and generative AI when we're thinking about, job search tools specifically, is you have these sort of all-in-one platforms like Teal or Cheeky or other things like that are, sort of like, you don't have to do any work. We'll do all the work. I would be a little skeptical about that kind of claim in general. I don't think it's that accurate today. But some parts and pieces of those tools, and then some of these specific AI tools can be really helpful if you kind of are going in knowing what you need to work on. So again, if you're sort of thinking about that job search sort of staging doc, okay, maybe I need to work on this sort of specific tactical problem or area where I'm getting stuck. Then I think AI tools can be quite helpful. So that's my take on that. And that's obviously a bit of a generalized thing. There's, a lot of variation in that. But I did kind of just want to mention, I think being specific about how you're using those things is really sort of, where the rubber meets the road on that, that kind of stuff. So, all right. So strategy number 2, and I'm going to kind of move us along fairly fast because I want to make sure sometimes I go deep on stuff. We just went really deep on some things. I want to make sure we're really in it. I'm a big fan of looking for sort of riches in the niches, right? Which is kind of a marketing, you don't have to care about that phrase, that's marketing speak. But basically, it's sort of about fine-tuning your search to look for roles and organizations that are, kind of in the pocket. And so in this particular example, let me open that real quick. I don't think you're going to be going this niche, and I don't know if you're going to find any Series B social impact startups with no layoffs, but it's just kind of a fun example. Series B, for folks who aren't familiar, you have startups that are sort of venture backed. That means there's, big investors sort of trying to move these high growth startups through. So they're putting big rounds in. Series B typically, let's see, seed, pre-seed, that's like 500 to 1 million to maybe 5 million, depending on how it's defined. Series A would be like 2, 5, 8, 10. Series B is probably gonna be like 8, 10, maybe 15 million on the high end. And that's the amount of money that gets poured in. And there's a whole corresponding sort of team size and things like that. So this would be kind of like an example of a niche. And you can actually, sometimes you can find startups with, specific parameters. So social impact, renewable energy, things like that would be in this space. With no layoffs, how do I find that? Tools like Crunchbase can be really helpful. And actually, I just realized Shani Benzer no longer works at Crunchbase. This is the former CMO there. Now is the CMO at Earnest, which I think is a fintech company, and their marketing team is hiring. I just saw that last week. So if you're in marketing, content marketing, account management, go take a peek at Shani's profile, look up Earnest, because they're definitely hiring for some fintech roles, and I'm pretty sure they're venture backed. So if that whole thing is your cup of tea, there's a couple leads in there. But anyway, Shani sort of, from their previous job at, at Crunchbase, sort of talked about how you can use filters. There's a bunch of different kinds of databases like this. Folks, will know Wellfound, which used to be AngelList. That's another that's more startup oriented database. Crunchbase is startups plus a lot of other stuff in tech, so bigger Fortune 500 type stuff too. But you can actually filter for different kinds of things. So you could look for, stuff based on funding rounds that's described here. You could look for ones based on did they have layoffs or not have layoffs. Cool, right? You can kind of sort of, narrow it in. Although if you're, looking, as someone mentioned in the chat a little bit ago, if you're sort of in the venture-backed startup world, pretty much they all have layoffs at some point, there are other signals financially that you can kind of look for. So just an example of how to kind of utilize that, that kind of strategy. I'm also a big fan of just sort of finding orgs and companies that you know and care about, and you can kind of follow the key people and just sort of be in the know by the time they share the job or post about it or that sort of thing. Other tools exist if you're not in the startup game and you're more looking for bigger kind of Fortune 500, big company corporate opportunities. Yahoo's finance. If you've never looked at the public earnings tool, you can break it down by different categories and industries. You can see the health of a company. And one of the examples I always give people is if you're looking at, a company and you're like, wow, I would like to be on the software team or the design team or the customer support or operations team for this org, and I want to know, is it a job that's going to go away or get laid off? Well, look at the financials, right? Is that team or that unit or that role in an area where it's like the legacy part of the company? And that's not always a bad thing, because sometimes the legacy part of the company makes a lot of money, but sometimes it's the first place to get cut or laid off. Conversely, if you're in a more experimental part of a really big company, that might be the first to get cut or laid off. So those are the kinds of things that you're going to be typically looking for. And again, obviously most folks here already know you're going to be kind of also looking for sort of niche communities, newsletters, job boards, things like that, tend to be really helpful and kind of finding the right stuff. And again, if you think back to that calendar example or, using another tool like Asana, those are links that, oh, wow, I can see that this tends to have pretty high quality stuff. Let me go ahead and put that on my calendar and my project management tool as a regular link to click through and check, right? Once a week. every other week, whatever you're, depending on the volume on that particular platform. So those are the kinds of things that you can kind of do when you're looking for that, that aspect of the riches and the niches, as we call it. Okay, let me pause and just see any questions that I missed. And Elisa, feel free to chime in as I'm kind of taking a peek at chat here.
Yeah, no, I just mentioned, we're going to be sharing the links, the open source job structuring tools that Joe and I went over. And then I said, just, for a more customized approach, for folks that like to go through it within a group and find a lot of success in that. I guess the best example that I can think of up to this point is I'm a fitness freak and I can't do workouts alone. Like I function best and get peak performance in kind of a CrossFit environment. And so people are like, well, if these resources are free, why would I pay for the boot camp? I liken it to why I pay for like a CrossFit or a class pass. Like I really thrive on the group environments. I get a lot out of people yelling and pushing me to lift harder. And so that doesn't work for everybody though. So if you are that person, and I'm speaking to you, there's 100 people on the call, hopefully like 10 people are like me. That's really what the boot camp is for. It's not a fit for everybody, but for folks that really get a lot out of a group setting, like an accountability group. We do like interview practice roulettes. We do one-on-ones. We do live working sessions. We do mock interviews in a private setting within the group during those sessions. And then we kind of really break down the job search tools, how to go about it, starting from in the beginning, like resume, essentials, cover letters, necessary or not, utilizing AI tools and doing working sessions for that. As well as like branding, career clarity, salary negotiations. So it's kind of the full spectrum. So I know Albert's going to tackle some of the more nuances. There's been a ton of questions on it. So I just wanted to share just kind of the differences in using the tools versus kind of a more group setting.
Yeah, for sure. I think, as you were saying, a community and accountability, right? I mean, you can Google or YouTube anything you want, on the job search, and there's a lot of stuff out there. I think it's silly to be disingenuous to pretend otherwise, but it really helps to have, community and accountability, and to help you fine tune and optimize your search as you go along. We're really big on that. I'll just, here's an example, right? So we've shared the kind of structure your job search doc. I do this. This is one of the things I almost always do is I'm like, where are you finding opportunities? And I think I saw someone kind of mention, Joe, do you use LinkedIn, et cetera? These kinds of tactics, here we go, just screen share you. These are the kinds of tactics that we just try to really help folks fine tune for their search. So if you are in that stage one, you're like, okay, I need to find more opportunities. Where am I looking? A strategy like this is something that we typically work through with folks. So here you are, trying to find remote software engineer jobs on the lever job ATS, right? This is, by the way, if you haven't seen this or clicked through, it's a very clever way. You can kind of date range it. You can skip all those email alerts and notifications. Just copy paste this link, put it in your calendar or your job search doc or Asana or whatever, and bam, you've got your click through link, right? Do this for all the common ones: Greenhouse, Lever, Workable, etc. But there's a lot of other sort of strategies to find stuff, right? So here's an example. Operations. So if you're kind of in business operations and you're not sure which titles, these are the kinds of things we talk through with folks. Okay, so maybe you need to kind of be clever. Operations and, I don't know, customer success. So this is just the kind of stuff that we tend to do in the boot camp, is like, tell us about your search. We try to understand where each person is at, what the positioning is, help them fine tune. This is just an example for the top of the funnel, right? The first stage. When it comes to sort of getting your materials together and doing interviews and things like that, we're pretty hands-on. So if those are the kinds of, reverse engineering and sort of working through your search, and if it's working, helping you speed it up. If it's not working, helping you diagnose and then adjust. That's the stuff we do every day, all day in the boot camp. I mean, it's a really big, serious thing for us, because no matter what, we're trying to help people move through that stage to, to find success. And also just connecting folks with each other too. I think that is a big piece. Most of us know how to search for things on the internet, but we need a team, right? We need resources, we need support, we need a community, we need accountability. And that's, I think, people who are the most successful in the boot camp are successful because that's what they're really looking for, is, help optimizing the search and kind of figuring out where they are, in it, and assessing that and improving it, and also getting some support and having a team. So I think that helps. Okay, so strategy number 3, highlight recession-proof skills. This one I'm just going to kind of quick run you through. A lot of people are like, oh, data, I should be in, do data work now. There isn't a business that data is not sort of important in at this point. There's a lot of different places that data is important. There's gathering, formatting, hygiene. You could be sort of really good at cleaning up spreadsheets and structuring things. That could be really helpful. Or you could be more on the front end, right? Where you're like presenting data, analyzing data, developing business model strategy around it. These are all different kinds of jobs that involve data. And I think sometimes we think about these as sort of like, wow, I'm going to be a data analyst or a data scientist. Well, yes, those are core data jobs, but there's a lot of other jobs. Like now there's data engineering. So there's a lot of things that are getting built around it. And this is definitely a recession-proof skill for that reason as well. And I'll give you an example in a sec. Another example would be remote and hybrid work. We all know this is sort of a pain point. I'm not going to get into the whole making people go back to the office. Return to office is kind of like the thing that is happening now. But the reality is that what is happening is very, very messy. So a lot of people, a lot of companies and organizations don't really understand how to have employees work in different modes, right? In the office sometimes, fully remote, in the office, but we all meet for meetings. We all get together once a week. And there's so many different kind of concepts and things like that. And so positioning yourself as someone who understands, can work across different modes, is a very high value skill, and may allow you to start working remotely or do a little more remote work, right? Which could be helpful. So this is just an example of what your positioning could look like, right? And I think that second example, which I was going to kind of just tap on, is, maybe you're not like a data scientist or a data engineer, but maybe you work on a customer support or an operations team, and you've kind of been the default person who downloads all of the customer surveys or feedback or whatever the case might be. You're doing something that kind of involves data, and then you structure and present it to the team. Well, yeah, that's a skill. That's a recession-proof skill, right? That's a skill that's always going to be in demand. So it's just kind of an example of how you can think about shifting your positioning. And then again, some other more classic roles like project management or, in marketing, where you might kind of like, adjust your positioning and how you talk about what you do. And I would say that, remote and hybrid work and data are 2 really good examples that probably most of the people in this room or this webinar have some experience with, right? But maybe you haven't thought about repositioning a little bit to address that. So it can be really helpful to kind of open that, that door as well. So, okay. That's 3. 4 is translating, tech skills to government, nonprofits, et cetera. I think, did we run a webinar maybe a month ago, Albert or Lisa, where we were actually talking about kind of moving into government? Am I remembering that correctly?
I think we did like a panel webinar on it, just to folks in different areas like government, healthcare. I know we did one also specifically just for startups, how to break into startups. So if there's high interest there, we can fire that up again. But
Fantastic.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a good area. And for folks who, if this is definitely an area of interest to you, I'm pretty sure, we tend to put all the recordings on YouTube. So if you look up the Albert's List YouTube, hit subscribe, go back and look at some of the recent videos. I bet you anything from the last 6 months, you're going to find an example or 2, including that panel. That would be helpful too. So one thing to just mention when you're kind of thinking about, governments, institutions, et cetera, is, they operate a little bit different. So if you're coming from sort of tech or private sector, you're going to have to adjust your expectations. You're going to have to do a little bit of research and some homework to find a way to do it. And I that sort of mentioned at the bottom about informational interviews and introductions. There's usually someone who's sort of gone that path before, right? And I'll just give you an example of, an org that sort of sits right next to the government. It's called US Digital Response. They build sort of civic tech. I don't know if they're hiring right now, but it is a very cool and well-paying org in general. So, if civic tech is up your alley, then go look up US Digital Response careers and see what's on the page there. But those are people who've made the transition, right? And so if you can find people like that who either work in government or next to government, you can kind of get some, context and network with folks like that. There are also obviously sites like USA Jobs, which is at the federal level. Government Jobs is where most of the state and local jobs live. But again, finding people who have sort of, worked in those spaces or transitioned into those spaces is really helpful. And I'll also just sort of say, I think the competition is increasing a little bit in those areas for, layoffs and other reasons. But I just, I'm gonna be really real with you. Like, I know people who work in higher ed and government, and they still don't get a lot of applications for jobs. Granted, the pay is not usually as good, but the benefits are usually quite good. And there's often, pension, state, if it's a local or regional government, there's obviously like a state pension fund that you can kind of work into, right? So if you do the math, you might be making 10 or 15 or $20,000 a year less, but it might be made up for in other benefits, right? And so, that's going to vary obviously based on where you're at. But, for folks in the US, that's definitely an attractive option in that sense. It's a good way to kind of reverse, reverse a little bit. And that's actually a good point too, just kind of like the translation or the reverse engineering. Sometimes the job titles actually look a little bit different. And I use the example of customer success. If you have a customer success or account management job in tech, that could be community outreach, that could be training, or that could be a data analyst in government, in higher ed or some other institutional environment. And again, finding, doing a little research, but also finding people who've made that switch, is really sort of a good way to, it's sort of, move through that process a little bit faster. Okay, last but not least, and then we'll get rolling over to the chat and kind of wrap up and do some questions and catch up. Keeping the fires warm, this is just networking, right? This is sort of outreach. This is not a new category. Most of you are like, yeah, I know I'm supposed to be networking. I get it. But keeping the fires warm is really about keeping connections going and finding ways to, engage with people. And the classic example that I always, sort of give when we do the boot camp is I talk a little bit about like the power of small asks, right? Which is, if let's say you haven't talked to a former coworker in a while, or you're cold messaging somebody, you probably don't want to make a really big ask. Hey, could you refer me to this job? I know you don't know me. I'd like you to refer me to your team. You don't have any idea if I'm good at anything. You just don't have any context. Well, even if they referred you, it's probably not a great referral because they literally have no context, right? So the ask is too big in that example. And I'm sure there's a couple people in the chat who could say like, hey, yeah, I've totally gotten referrals into companies and it's kind of useless, right? If they don't know you. Now, if they know you and they're like, tell their manager, or they tell someone at that other team that they work with, like, wow, Elisa's amazing. I worked with Lisa at whatever. I had a chance to chat with Lisa and kind of learn, they seem to know a lot about this or that, or they're really well-versed. If they have context for you, then a referral can be quite useful. And so, the classic small ask is, you send someone, if you're going to do the cold DM, you send someone the message and you say, hey, I'm kind of keeping an eye on XYZ org. Noticed you've been there for about a year. If you're open to a quick question, I'm curious, is this a workplace you'd recommend to friends, family, or colleagues? Short question, very easy to answer. They'll probably read it. They might not respond because not everybody responds to everything, but they might just go yes or no. And if they say no, then, okay, you might want to look into it a little more, right? That could be a red flag. If they say yes, then, it's not amazing detail, but it could be useful. But anyway, that's the classic answer. And then you just say, oh, thank you. That's really helpful. I appreciate that. Thanks for taking the time. If I think another small question or two, would it be okay if I reached back out in a week or two? Yeah, okay, no problem. That's easy. Again, you're making it very easy for them to respond. And then, put it on your calendar or make a note. And in 2 weeks, reach back out. Hey, thank you. That was so helpful. I actually applied for a role there. I was wondering, I had a quick question. What do you think of this? And again, make it small, right? Don't ask for too much. That's how you build the relationship. And of course, there's more generalized networking that you can do too. And one of the things that we do in the bootcamp is we definitely encourage people like, share your messaging, we have templates and outreach, scripts and things like that, but share your messaging, tell us what you're thinking about sending, like, let's help you fine tune and optimize that. And we try to do that within each cohort. We have a LinkedIn group chat that we keep open. Everybody kind of workshops their outreach and things like that. So again, another example of that kind of, having a team and having folks that you can actually kind of, work with. Yeah. And then Albert, were you going to wrap us up with sort of don't forget the fundamentals? I can't quite remember.
Yeah, I was going to wrap it up with the
Awesome.
don't forget the fundamentals. So hopefully
Yes,
you're still here with us after a little bit over an hour and 5 different strategies. Let's go to the next slide. And if you have any questions, Elisa and Joe can help answer. So, in times of economic uncertainty, keeping the basics tried and true is important because the basics matter more than ever. So if you're somebody who has typos, if you're somebody who's not great at following up, if you are using AI, you got to definitely double check what it is that you're doing because people are going to be looking for any reason to say no to you. And so double check, have somebody do a sanity check, a real live human being, and just make sure that you're on the same wavelength. Um, because a lot of people rely on emerging technology these days, and it's not such the greatest thing ever. Next slide. The number two piece when it comes back to your basics is that your attitude means everything, right? So I know a lot of you have been out of work for a while. We're grumbling, we're disappointed, we're cursing at our LinkedIn every single day because it feels really terrible. But one of the things that I've been saying in a lot of these webinars over the last month is that you can no longer take a great resignation mindset into a return to office world. And so what does that mean? It's that during the Great Resignation, and we did a panel on this back then too. It was open season. If you didn't feel happy about your job, you can go find a job and maybe you get like six more offers. Now you're maybe lucky to get if you get two. And so know that if you go into a job search with the intent of knowing that things could be a little bit different, right? So you want to also with that stay consistent. You just don't want to have a job. I want you to take the word I want a job out and well, you want a job. You don't want to just want it. You want to also be going after it and being very deliberate about it. And then finally, have accountability and community, which is what we've been talking about with our boot camp here for a little bit that we can address. Next slide. And so we're going to talk a little bit next about our 8 weeks to employed boot camp. So if you've stayed on here for the last 67 minutes, thank you so much, number one.
You're a
And
champ.
thank you.
You
What's
made
that?
it. Thank you. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you made it. Yeah, you made it. And oh, I see. And if you're going to stay on for a little longer, I'd love to have you here. I know that, you come for the tips and you don't stay for the sales pitch, but if you can, we'd love to have you. And so what is our boot camp that's happening up next? It starts on February 12th, and what we offer is basically an 8-week comprehensive immersive boot camp that is all virtual. So you can take this from the sandy beaches of Cancun all the way to the high mountains of the Rockies. And what we're going to help you do is we're going to help you understand you, your positioning, the roles and the goals that you want. We're going to help you master the fundamentals that we just talked about with the resume, the open source materials. We're going to teach you how to network and network effectively. And we're going to teach you how to be a really, really great interviewer. Next slide. Not only that, we're going to show you how to navigate change because being resilient is more than half the battle when it comes to your job search. We're going to talk about building credibility in your brand, and then we're going to conclude by talking about offer letters and negotiation. And so it's the opportunity for you to really get everything on the hiring hierarchy that I mentioned at the very beginning, which I think might be the next slide here. And it's an opportunity for you. And so, in addition to that, not only will you get that hiring hierarchy philosophy, you get that accountability with an ongoing LinkedIn chat. There are 50 people, more than 50 people who have completed the boot camp over the years. And so we would like to add you to that if it is something that you indeed would like to work on. There are weekly office hours in addition to our regular sessions to vent or answer your burning questions. You can have access to my phone number. Call me anytime and I will pick up. And we can talk about why your interview was crappy or why that your employer made you upload your resume after you entered in all your resume details, and so forth. You have access to recruiters and other job search experts. Behind this is a community of 49,000 people, plus an even greater, broader community that reaches out into probably the 70 to 80,000 range of professionals, of people that I can connect you to, that Elisa and Joe would connect you to. And then with the premium work, you get one-on-one time with Joe, Elisa, or I. I stay on the phone forever. I may tell you that I'm going to give you an hour, but I probably end up giving you 3 because I care about this work and I've been doing it for a little while now. And so drop the link, Elisa or Joe, if you want to sign up. And the other thing that I want to also offer is that if you're on the fence about this and money's an issue and you're looking at, really, really thin margins and you got to feed your family, um, reach out to me. Let's talk about it because I want you all to get hired, and I know that you're probably going to attend a multitude of webinars this week that sell you something for 3 grand, sell you something for 500, sell you something for 750, and none of them are going to give you like the level of generosity that we're offering you here tonight. And so if this is something that you really want to do and you're tired of a tough job search, then this is something that we want you to be a part of too. And Joe, Lisa, and I, we also work day jobs too, because we also have bills. And so we understand how this job search works. I'm not some influencer with 1.5 million people on Instagram and TikTok, giving you short 30-second videos like your rich BFF, talking at you because I'm financially free. I work a day job as well in addition to this. And so I go through the very same things. I would say that I am one of you. And so you're going to get that level of relatability as well that you won't get from a big social media influencer. And so, please ask your questions, ask away. Joe and Elisa, I've tapped them as the founder of this organization to lead my boot camp because not only are they strategic, but they're also compassionate. If you want them to treat you like a drill sergeant, I'm sure they have that in them. But I also know that if you need a shoulder to cry on, Joe and Elisa are two of the best that you can do that with.
Yeah, we believe in,
Yeah.
I appreciate that about Lisa a lot, and you can chime in too, Lisa. Like, we believe in being real and honest about the search. And it's hard. It's a hard market. Even regularly, it's hard to job search. There's just so much stuff to do. And, if you're
Yeah.
transitioning careers, if you're dealing with ageism, if maybe you haven't been in the market for a while, it's even harder, right? There's so many different kinds of scenarios that folks, kind
We
of talk.
literally had a session the last boot camp, I believe, where we spent the first 30 minutes literally just checking in. And I heard things that I didn't think I'd ever hear from people. And my kid is sick. They got in trouble at school. I got ghosted 5 times this week. And we listen to that, right? It's not that we don't diminish that whatsoever because these are things that we all experience in the job search. And I think the most important one is that, you can feel so alone in this too.
Yeah.
And we don't want you to feel alone because it's just it can really wreck with your mental health. Um, and so yeah.
Yeah.
Rachel asks, how hard is the job market now compared to the Great Recession or the pandemic? So statistically speaking, it's not bad. Spiritually and based on everything else, it looks like it's pretty hard, especially if you work in tech, and even harder if you work in recruiting and HR, because all of those roles have been just absolutely gutted. And so I take the Bureau of Labor Statistics data with a heavy grain of salt, because I think numbers are being fudged with. One of the things that really tells me that this is evident and happening is if you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics report and you see that jobs reports have been rounded down in prior months, and that's always been a great gigantic concern. And so, yes, now that we get to the boot camp is $295 for those who want to do just the regular pricing. And then it is
It's three
395 for
for the early
premium
bird.
job seeker early bird and 449 for general admission.
Yeah.
And so if you think about it, you divide the or general admission job seeker by your 8 weeks, it's gonna run you maybe 40 to $50 a week. And so this is literally just so that we can get compensated for a little bit of our time. And look, I will go above and beyond whatever you need. I do this because I've been in these rough, tough situations before. And outside of my day job, this is my life purpose. And so make me your life purpose and we will go far for you. Um, but in addition to that, I also believe in this because many of you have families to go home to. Many of you have mouths to feed, children to take care of. And it's just, it's painful to sit there and know that you can't get your child's favorite toy they because you don't have a job. And I know, Elisa being the mother here knows about that. Elisa, I think you wanted to share something.
Yeah, I wanted to say a couple folks are DMing, like, do we need to be prepared for it? And by the way, thank you,
The
Joe.
answer is no.
Yeah, for going over boot camp. You just come as you are. And if you have any like questions on like sizing the boot camp, like the customizations, like please reach out to us on LinkedIn and we can go more in depth in that. But the boot camp is meant for you to just come wherever you are in your job search. We know that everybody has different obligations that they have to deal with in life, but the understanding is that when you come to boot camp, we kind of equalize that playing field. Like everybody gets that same information and we spend the extra time to make sure everybody's up leveled and everybody's on the same playing field, depending on what you're actively applying for. And so come as you are, but just be open to sharing. We have to know where you're coming from. We have to know what you're needing and being very concise about it. And we can definitely get you there. And then just to iterate, the two things that I think most people find a lot of benefit from is that accountability LinkedIn chat. There's folks that are bootcamp alum that still stay connected when they hit the dips and the lows in job search transition. The group is able to uplift them and pump them up with new resources. And so I feel like that's probably the biggest value add out of the group because we have amazing free open source job search tools. You can utilize those and customize it at any point, but that accountability group, I feel like, is a big piece that really helps folks just really charge their job search. So I would say that that's kind of the, I'm not good with acronyms. Sorry. English is a second language, but the silver bullet or just like the secret sauce, if you will. And just being in a group, again, being the fitness freak I am, it's the boot camp's not a fit for everybody, but if you need that group mentality, there's nothing like it out there. And Joe, myself, and Albert, we represent different perspectives. The working parent, the professional that's returning into the workforce because they have to take care of family or prioritize other things. The W-2 professional that has side hustles, right? Like, not gonna name names, but like all of those personas, like we want to hear from you and we want you to be part of the group because you're absolutely what we designed the boot camp for. So I'll drop the link in there. I'll put our LinkedIn profiles in there as well. It's probably the best way to get a hold of us. We're constantly checking it. So just wanted to share a couple 2 cents and then I'll turn it back to Joe and Albert to close this out. And again, thank you everyone for spending your Monday night with us.
Yeah, appreciative. And, I think as you all, one other thing I'll just say, as you all have heard sort of from Elisa and Albert, like we are people who believe in being of service. And that's really the reason we do this work. I'm a very focused person. I come from a marketing background and growth hacking and all the kind of stuff that comes with that. And the outcome that makes me the happiest, the reason I do the work is when someone's like, I got a job, I started a new job. That's the outcome, right? We want to be of service to you and help you get to that point because we know what it means, right? We know what it means for folks who are, keeping your bills paid, keeping your kids clothed and fed, taking care of a parent who's elderly. I've been through that myself. There's all these life circumstances that we definitely relate to and connect with, and we know there are ones we don't relate to, but we care about nonetheless, and we believe in being of service, and that's the whole reason we do all of this. So.
Yep. So do we have any other slides left?
I think that's it. Let's take a little, hold on.
Yeah, so who our boot camp is for.
I missed a couple. All right, you're right. I missed one.
The
Sorry.
slides almost share themselves, right? So
like
look,
right on tap.
if you needed a job yesterday and you're tired of doing the same thing, right? So the definition of insanity, we all know what that is. If you're looking for accountability, community, and support, it's hard to do this stuff alone, right? Entrepreneurs have masterminds. 9 to 5ers have their bosses. But when you're on your own and you're looking for a new job, you need your own version of it. If you've been out of the job market for a while and learn how it's done in 2024, not 2023, 2024, that's also one way. Or if you don't know how to job hunt and you're doing it for the very first time, whether you're somebody who's just literally out of school or somebody who's always worked for yourself. And so what are you going to get from all this? You're going to get that scalable job search with tips on AI tools. You're going to learn how to look for the riches and the niches. We're going to highlight those recession building, relationship building skills that you can get. You can translate your skills to government and nonprofits. And by the way, during this next month, separate of our boot camp, we're actually hosting a panel on how to break out of tech and go and work in places like teaching and law and government. And so look for that as well. That's actually something that many of you may be interesting as well. And so we have a panel for that. And then finally, learning how to position yourself, network, and reach out in ways that are effective for you. And so um, I'm going to drop that bootcamp link again in here. If you want to reach out to me separately after because you have a circumstance, we can definitely talk about that. I am very empathetic to it and would like to help as many of you as possible. So yeah, with that, any final slide that we have, Joe?
No, I think that's the last one.
Okay.
The only note I have written down is we could tap on the ageism question if we wanted to spend a couple
Yeah.
minutes talking about that. I don't know if you have thoughts about that, Albert, but I know that's something people brought up and have thought about too.
Yep. Let's do it.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of aspects to that, but I would just sort of share my quick thoughts, and then Albert and Elisa, feel free to chime in on that too. I think in the tactical part of the job search, there's some stuff that you can do to deal with ageism. It mostly has to do with a bit of sort of anonymizing your materials, kind of setting up that process a bit, your resume, et cetera. Those are pretty specific tactical things. There's nothing really sort of magical about it. In general, you may end up shifting or changing your targets in terms of organizations. Like if it's a startup with everyone who looks to be under 30, that might be a hard sell, right? So there is some of that shifting. But I think in general, yeah, with ageism, I think the thing that is most hard, and I'm very upfront about that, is besides sort of getting your materials in place and your applying game sort of in place, is really just trying to keep the focus on the value, right? And being specific and tailoring what you bring. Because if you do have a good chunk of job history, you might need to underplay certain things and let certain things out, right? Because they're not, first of all, there's a long work history, but second of all, it's not all applicable to the potential job at hand. And so I think a lot of that is out of your control, but what you can control is the positioning piece. And that's sort of the tailoring positioning is sort of the most important part of that. Not a perfect answer to ageism, but it's sort of the best that you can do.
All right. So with that, I'm going to actually go ahead and stop the webinar now.